Welcome again if you're here for the first time or the first time in a long time. We're in a series called The New Normal, looking at how to find God when we are physically isolated, financially stressed, relationally strained, and emotionally exhausted, as so many of us are. Last week, we talked about how to build stronger community when we are physically isolated from each other, when you can't see friends or family in person, when you can't go to the gym or meet up for coffee. You know, it's been over 2 months since we've been able to gather here as a church on campus together. And just so you know, we are still following the stay home, stay healthy guidelines, and we'll be working hard to determine just how and when we can safely be back on campus together. But no, until then, Starting Point is still happening, Alpha is still happening, life groups are still happening, recovery meetings are still happening, pastoral care is still happening, and most importantly, life change is still happening, even as we navigate this season of being physically isolated. But today, we're looking at this other key area of relational impact, and it's not with the people you can't get close to, it's with the people you can't get away from. Your spouse, or your kids, or for you young people watching, your parents who are probably driving you crazy right now. You know, the stay-at-home or shelter-in-place restrictions around the country have literally turned family life upside down. I mean, think about it. Home used to be a place for family life, but now the home is also the office and the classroom and the playground and the fitness center and the hair salon. And if you have kids and you work from home, your kids are now your office mates. How's that going? And if your kids are in school, you're now helping them teach their classes. How's that going? All while working from home, while parenting your kids, while caring for your spouse, while avoiding other people, while trying to stay sane. Can I get an amen in the comment section? Nina and I had our second child, Jude, on February 4th, and he's the sweetest little guy, but he's also had some pretty serious acid reflux, which means he's been waking up every hour or two every single night for the past 3 months. Our daughter Nora, she just turned 3, and she is in full three-nager mode. She needs constant attention or play or discipline. But in a way, we were prepared for those things. What we weren't prepared for was that we would be forced to stay at home. No parks or playgrounds or play dates for Nora. No friends or family members helping with the newborn. Just me and my wife, our 2 little ones, and lots of crying, with the kids too. And it's been like this every day. We have a calendar in our bathroom filled with the plans for that month, and March was filled with stuff we didn't do. April was basically blank. We haven't even turned to May because what difference does it make? All the while, I'm trying to lead our staff and our church family through this unprecedented challenge from my little makeshift office at our house. A couple weeks ago, I was in my office and I heard some crying outside, and I went outside to see what was going on. And my wife was holding Jude while she was running after Nora, who had cut her foot and had left a little trail of blood all over the house. So Nina's trying to calm her down and clean up the carpet and hold on to Jude. And all I could think was, can y'all keep it down out here? I mean, I'm writing a sermon on how to love your family. And it's not just me. I mean, we've all had moments in our family where we just need a break from each other. You know, Nora, she's basically obsessed with her little brother, but last week she said, "Mommy, Jude's getting a little old. I think it's time we throw him in the trash." Now, she's 3, so she can say that, but here's the thing. I wouldn't be surprised if the rest of my family wanted to throw me out into the trash at some point. And that's family life and the new normal. And I've talked to a number of parents who have faced far greater challenges than we have. Children with special needs who don't have access to the services they depend on. Parents who've lost work and now the family's under incredible financial pressure. Some of you know the old African proverb that says, "It takes a village to raise a child." And of course, we know from research in our day that kids need not just their parents in their life, but multiple layers of caring adults, relatives, neighbors, teachers, coaches. But in the new normal, the village is out, quarantine's in. And it's hard. It's stressful. And most of all, it's revealing cracks in relationships and marriages that may have been around for a while, but for many are now reaching what feels like a breaking point. The good news is couples now have the opportunity, they have ample time to work on their marriage and confront issues they've been avoiding. The bad news is you can't avoid it any longer. You can't just stay late at the office. Can't always be out with your friends. It's time to start addressing what's really going on in your marriage or what's really going on in that relationship in the midst of this pressurized and anxiety-filled environment. So here's the question. How can we keep our relationships and marriages healthy in the new normal? How can we stay literally on the same team? A friend of mine who has young children like we do told me that even when he and his wife are struggling, one of them will often put their arm around the other and say, we have to stay on the same team. Otherwise, the kids will win. So how do we stay on the same team? Well, to answer that question, I want to do something a little different this weekend. I want to give you a set of principles that you can use with your spouse or in that relationship. And I'm calling it the 10 Commandments of Marriage in the New Normal. Now, these are not the 10 Commandments in the Bible, but these principles are all from the Bible. Now, if you're not married, don't log off yet, okay? I was single until I was 38 years old, and I heard a lot of talks about marriage that had nothing to do with my everyday life. This is not going to be one of those talks, okay? These principles will apply to a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend. They can apply to friends and family, and if nothing else, as you learn these, they can help you help people that you know in your life who may be struggling relationally. So this is not just about you and your life. This is about equipping you to help people who need it. And by the way, if you're watching and you're not sure about Jesus yet in your life, try these in a relationship or try these in your marriage. Maybe this will help you see why he's worth trusting and following in your everyday life. So the 10 Commandments of Marriage in the New Normal. These are going to be really simple to understand, but they can be really difficult to put into practice. Some will take lots of time, maybe lots of conversation. Some may take even asking for help or working with a mentor or counselor. Because here's the thing, I want to say this at the beginning. Relationships are messy, but I believe in a God who meets people in the mess. And I think each of these principles can help you find God in your relationship. So here we go, and I promise I'm going to end on time, okay? First commandment, thou shalt be grateful for one another. Thou shalt be grateful for one another. You know, before we talk about any kind of practical wisdom for your marriage, the first step towards a thriving relationship is genuine gratitude for it. The Apostle Paul wasn't married, but he modeled this in how he expressed gratitude for the people he loved. To the church in Rome, he wrote, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you. To the church in Corinth, he said, I always thank God for you. To the church in Philippi, he said, I thank my God every time I remember you. That's a lot of gratitude. Now, does that mean there was never any conflict or disagreement? Does that mean he was never hurt or disappointed? Of course not. Paul had to work through serious conflict with these people, but he always started from a posture of gratitude. I'm just so thankful that you're in my life. I'm just so thankful that I get to enjoy who God made you to be. I'm just so thankful that God is using you to help me grow. That's the kind of gratitude I'm talking about. See, we tend to think that relational satisfaction comes from having good chemistry with a person, but that's not actually true. Relational satisfaction comes from having gratitude for a person. Another way to say it is, gratitude for a person always leads to joy with that person. Which is why, even when you're stuck at home with each other 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, thou shalt be grateful for one another. And if you're not feeling it right now, and I get it, start saying it anyway, and your feelings will follow. You know, last week we were sitting down to dinner as a family, and there was a card at my seat for me from Nina. And it wasn't a special occasion. It wasn't my birthday or Father's Day or Pastor Appreciation Day. That's actually October 11th, if you want to save the date. This card just came out of the blue, and it was just about gratitude. Listen to what she said. Just some of her words. She said, I know I don't say it enough, but I want you to know how grateful I am for you, how thankful I am for all that you do, and how proud I am of how hard you work. Thank you for being my partner, for being present, for giving it your all, regardless of what our rotten little toddler throws at us. And I just love you so much. And I got to tell you, when I read that card, I practically broke down in tears. And I didn't even know what to say. I think I just said, ditto, true guy response. But that card that I have, I keep it in by my computer at home. I reread it every single day. And so Nina, let me just go on record and say, ditto, babe. I'm so grateful for you too, and I'm so grateful we get to figure this all out together. Thou shalt be grateful for one another. If you don't start there, everything else I say, everything else you do, it's just going to feel like work. That's the first commandment. Second commandment, thou shalt expect problems. Thou shalt expect problems. You know, it's interesting when a couple gets married and takes their vows, they almost always say something like, for better or for worse. But then after we get married, we have this strange tendency to expect our spouse to consistently deliver the for better side of the deal, right? I expect you to make me feel good. I expect you to meet all of my needs. I expect you to know what I'm thinking without even saying a word. And so when we run into problems, we feel cheated. And we start to say things like, I can't believe he did that, or I can't believe that she said that. Ever said that about someone in your life? Well, guess what? There's someone in your life that could say that about you too. Because we don't just bring our hopes into a relationship. We bring all of our issues as well. Insecurity, unresolved anger, family of origin issues, unhealthy habits. You see, no one gets into a relationship or marriage with a clean slate, which is why thou shalt expect problems. Thou shalt expect difficulties and disagreements. The question is, how will you respond when the problems come? Which leads to a third commandment, and it's this: thou shalt not let a 2 become a 10. Thou shalt not let a 2 become a 10. Now, what's that about? Well, this is all about how you handle conflict. So a quick fill-in-the-blank question. The number one thing that couples fight about is, any guesses? Some of you are thinking money, or maybe parenting, or maybe how you spend time with friends, or maybe division of labor. That's a big one. And yes, these are all issues that couples can struggle to see eye to eye on, but none of them are the right answer. According to a psychologist named Dr. John Gottman, who's one of the leading experts in marriage and relational health, the number one thing that couples fight about is nothing. Nothing meaning on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like a 2 or a 1. You know, someone doesn't put the dish back where it belongs. Someone doesn't schedule the piano lesson in time. Someone doesn't put the cap back on the toothpaste, which is gross. But it's not a huge sin. It's not a broken vow. But then it escalates into an all-out fight. Why? Well, because for the weeks leading up to that moment, every time there's been an issue that's just been a 1 or a 2, every time there's been a minor misstep or miscommunication, you've been avoiding dealing with it. It could be because of busyness or laziness or just plain avoidance. Now, let's add to the fact that we're locked up at home together, which means the potential for conflict is way, way, way up. And it doesn't take long for a 2 to start to feel like a 10, which is why we need to lean into conflict, not away from it. We have to lean into conflict, not away from it, even with really small things. And just so you know, Jesus made this really, really clear. He said, if your brother or sister or spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend, I'm adding that in, but they're included, if they sin, go and point out their fault just between the 2 of you. Point out their fault. Now that's the hard part. No one feels great about doing that. Some of you might, but there's another sermon about that one. And then just between the 2 of you, that's the gracious part. That's Jesus saying, don't make a scene, don't shame them, don't do it with the kids around. But here's the deal. You can't let those small misses or misunderstandings get really, really big. Thou shalt not let a 2 become a 10. Which leads to a fourth commandment. Thou shalt not criticize. Thou shalt not criticize. And again, Dr. Gottman's research is really helpful here. After interviews with thousands of married couples and then following their progress over time, Dr. Gottman found 4 signs of relational failure that allow him to predict divorce with 93% accuracy. That's remarkably accurate. That's almost prophetic. And the first of those signs is criticism. And by the way, if you want to know what the other 3 are and what they do to a relationship, I'm going to unpack those tomorrow on our Daily Connection online. It's a 10-minute devotional time that we do every day on Facebook Live at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and anyone can join. You don't need to have a Facebook account. You just need to go to our North Shore Facebook page and you can watch. But the first sign of real relational danger, according to Gottman, is criticism. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a complaint about your spouse. A complaint is saying, I felt hurt when you showed up late or whatever you did. Criticism is different. Criticism is blaming a relationship problem on the character of the other person. You always spend too much money. You never get home on time. You always forget what I ask you to do. You never think of me. You see, when you say you always or you never, it implies that the problem is not the other person's behavior, it's the other person. And this is actually toxic to healthy relationships. I love the standard that the Apostle Paul set. He said, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Only what is helpful for building others up. What a great standard to use even when you're fighting, even when your feelings are hurt. Because here's the thing, conflict tends to end in the same tone that it begins. In other words, if you start with criticism and blame, you're likely to end there too. But if you start with what is helpful for building others up, for building up the other person according to his or her needs, you're likely to end that way too. But of course, we don't always live up to this standard, do we? We say things we don't mean. We do things that are hurtful or disappointing. We criticize, which leads to the next commandment. Thou shalt say, I'm sorry. Thou shalt say, I'm sorry. And I'm not talking about the way we sometimes say I'm sorry to try to smooth over a moment of disagreement. You know, our daughter Nora has mastered this skill. She'll do something we've asked her not to do, and I'll call her out for it. And then she'll come over and look at me with those precious evil eyes and say, I'm sorry, Daddy, I'm sorry. But no remorse, no regret. She doesn't even intend to change her behavior. You know, thank goodness we adults have all grown out of this, right? Maybe not so much. Truth is, I do the same thing to Nina. She'll call me out, and I'm quick to say, well, I'm sorry, but not because I feel remorse, but because I want to move the conversation along because it's uncomfortable. The I'm sorry I'm talking about is different. It's not a way to deflect an accusation. It's actually the final step in a long process of self-examination. It comes after deep soul searching when I look closely at my motivations and my actions, not to justify myself, but to expose and reveal any kind of sin or selfishness in my heart. Like the psalmist, I go to God saying, search me, O God, and know my heart. See if there is any offensive way in me, anything at all. And here's the bad news. There's always something. There's always something. In every fight I've ever had with Nina, even when I'm 99% right, which is basically 0% of the time, there's still 1% of my own sin that needs to be addressed. And the only way to make things right is to come to her humbly and say, I did this, and I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? And by the way, this moment is the most vulnerable moment in any marriage or relationship, which is why we so often avoid it. Because when I say I'm sorry, I am now at her mercy. I've surrendered my rights. I've put down my defensiveness, and I can only wait to see what she does in response. That leads to the next commandment. Thou shalt say, I forgive you. You know, forgiveness is like the oxygen for a relationship. Without it, the relationship will suffocate and eventually die. And we don't forgive just because it's helpful to somebody else. We forgive because we've been forgiven. Because God, in his great mercy, did not hold our sins against us. He went to the cross in the person of Jesus so that we could be forgiven. And by the way, if you've never received God's forgiveness in your life, that's actually where you need to start. The Bible doesn't say, go and try to find the inner strength to forgive. It says, forgive as God forgave you. Forgiveness is a response to what God has done for us, which is also why the Bible says there's no limit to forgiveness. There's no ceiling or quota after which we no longer have to forgive, because God never runs out of forgiveness for us. Now here's the thing. That doesn't mean that you should allow yourself to be harmed or abused if there's a pattern of abuse or violence at home. In fact, we know that rates of domestic violence are going up in this new normal. And if you're in a situation like that, don't wait. Please reach out for help. We actually have a confidential number you can call here at North Shore anytime. And we have groups that meet online that are safe places to share, grieve, get help, and recover. But for the rest of us, maybe what's keeping your marriage or that relationship from flourishing isn't about what they need to do or how they need to change. Maybe it's about you needing to say those words, I forgive you. I forgive you. And just to make this practical, this kind of forgiveness means no more lists. You know, those lists where you keep kind of a mental record of all the things your spouse has done, the mistakes, the miscommunication, the mess-ups. The stuff you keep on hand so you can bring it up when you need it. Well, remember when you did this? Or remember when you said that? Don't look at me like you don't know what I'm talking about, friends. These lists are the ways we protect ourselves. These lists are the ways we can manipulate somebody else. These lists are the ways we try to keep control. But real forgiveness means no more lists. I love how the Apostle Paul once put it. He said, love keeps no record of wrongs. No more lists. Why? Because it's been forgiven. But remember, forgiveness is messy, and working through relational pain takes lots of time and lots of help, which leads to another commandment. Thou shalt pray together. Thou shalt pray together. No matter what's going on in your family today, no matter how difficult these days have been, you can always pray. And there's few practices that create stronger ties in a relationship than prayer. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, well, of course, that's what a pastor at church would say. Well, here's the deal. That's also what secular research is saying as well. Quick example, about 10 years ago, there was a study that was done called Faith and Unfaithfulness. It was a secular study. And the researchers were asking the question, how does faith impact relational satisfaction and the risk of infidelity? So they had different couples engage in different daily activities for 4 weeks. One group prayed for each other every day for 4 weeks. A second group practiced positive thinking towards each other for 4 weeks. And a third group, they did activities together for 4 weeks. Now, any guesses on how this turned out? Well, the couples who prayed together at the end of 4 weeks felt more trust in and unity with their partners than any other groups. And again, this is a secular study telling us these findings, that basically a couple who prays together is more likely to stay together. And as a pastor, I just want to say, duh. I mean, that's something the Bible has been saying for thousands of years, and it's good to see the research is finally catching up. So here's the thing. If you want a relationship to be strong, pray together. Make it something you do every day. Thou shalt pray together, even if you're busy, even if there are pain points or problems. Which leads to another commandment. Thou shalt not compare thy marriage with thy neighbor's. Thou shalt not compare thy marriage with thy neighbor's. And here's the deal. Couples do this all the time. I mean, we look at our marriage or relationship and we see all the difficulties, the disagreements, and we see the real truth about each other. But then we look at other couples and we see all the kissing selfies on their Instagram feed, hashtag you complete me, hashtag InstaLove. And we assume there's not fighting, there's not disagreements, it's just love, laughter, and an ongoing stroll down libido lane. But that's what happens when we compare the inside of our relationship with the outside of somebody else's. There's actually a psalm in the Bible where the writer is comparing his struggles, his inner life, with the outward appearance of others. And he says this, they have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from common human burdens. They are not plagued by human ills. Do you hear the discouragement, the frustration in those words? Well, that's what happens when we compare the inside of our relationship to the outside of somebody else's. So the next step on this is really simple. Stop it. Just stop comparing. You never know the whole story about their relationship. You can't see their pain or their problems. Therefore, thou shalt not compare thy marriage with thy neighbor's. Next commandment. Thou shalt get help when you get stuck. Thou shalt get help when you get stuck. Because no matter how well you practice these principles, no matter how hard you work at your relationship, at some point, your relationship will hit an obstacle or a difficulty that you simply cannot overcome by yourselves. And the only way forward will be to seek out help from a pastor or a counselor or a mentor or a trusted friend. And here's the deal. Here at North Shore, we are unapologetic about the importance of couples getting counseling. It's not a sign that you're sick. It's a sign that you're sane. Nina and I have a counselor that we see in some seasons regularly, in others just occasionally, because we face challenges that we can't get through on our own, and we know we need help, and so will you at some point in some way. There will be a loss. There will be a disagreement. There will be an unhealthy pattern of behavior. There will be something that threatens your relationship. And here's the deal. God doesn't expect you to just figure it out. He invites you to ask for help. And maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe you've been stuck in the same place in your marriage or relationship for some time. Here's the deal. Don't wait. Don't wait. I have a friend who's a Christian counselor, and he says of the couples he sees that don't make it, he believes 100% could have ended differently if they just came to see him sooner. 100%. That's his view. And if you need help finding a counselor, reach out to us. We have a team that can help you find a good one that can meet your needs. This is also why we are unapologetic about the importance of life groups here at North Shore. Because your spouse or your significant other cannot meet your every need. You need community. So if you're not in a life group, I've said this before, get in a life group. And if you are, here's the deal. Let down your guard. Let others in, especially when it comes to your marriage or any kind of relational struggle. I know, it can feel like you want to keep those things hidden. Bring it into the light. Thou shalt get help when you get stuck. Which leads us, finally, I know you've been waiting, to the 10th and last commandment for navigating relationships in this new normal. Thou shalt keep Jesus at the center. Thou shalt keep Jesus at the center. You know, a marriage agreement is not just an agreement between two people. It's an agreement between three. And Jesus wants to be in the center of your marriage. Jesus wants to be at the center of that relationship. Not the neat and tidy one that you want other people to think you have, but the real messy one that you actually have. And if Nina were here with me today, she'd tell you our marriage, it's messy a lot. I told you about that thank you card she wrote. A few days later, we had a painful moment about me not being available when she needed some help with Jude. And it was rough, it was hard, it was raw. And in those moments, I can be so tempted to think, I don't know how to do this anymore. And that's when I have to remember there's a third person in the middle of all this, and he's not holding a clipboard, he's not keeping score, he's not awarding points to the better spouse, he's not waiting for you to figure it all out by yourself. He is the God of grace. He is the God of second chances. He is the God who has never seen a relationship he can't fix or a marriage he can't restore. And here's the deal. If you don't know Jesus, especially in this new normal, maybe it's time to invite him into that marriage. Maybe it's time to invite him into that relationship. You can actually do that right now. You can even do it as a couple. You can say, Jesus, we want to invite you into our lives, into our marriage. We surrender control. We simply can't do this on our own. We need you. And if this is the first time you've done something like that, I want you to do this for me. If you would text my faith to 97000. Why? Because we'd love to reach out and help. We'd love to send you a book to help you with what the new normal of life with Jesus is all about. Because you don't have to walk alone. Others of you have been in the church a long time, but here's the deal. You've been on autopilot in your marriage, and maybe this new normal has revealed some of the pain and problems going on in your relationship. Maybe you need to take the same step and invite Jesus back into the center of your marriage, your relationship. And here's the deal, you can do that right now. Because there's no such thing as a perfect marriage or a perfect relationship. Only a surrendered one. One that's surrendered to the God who can give your marriage or relationship the new normal that you so desperately need. So let's close by talking to God about that right now. Would you pray with me? God, we want to bring our relationships before you right now. In all the mess, with all the pain, and I know right now there's deep pain and concern, there's deep hurt, there can be deep broken trust around this. And for some watching right now, it can be hard to even want to go there, talk about it, lean into this at all. And so God, I pray for your gracious presence for everybody who's watching, everybody who's listening, that you remind them that your grace is enough, that there's no relationship that's beyond reach, no marriage that's beyond repair. And God, remind us that you are good enough to help where we aren't good enough. And God, we want to invite you back into the center, back into the middle of our relationships. Jesus, help us love each other. Help us practice these principles with grace and patience and love and persistence, that we may experience the joy and redemption of being in relationships with each other. And God, we're so grateful for the gift of relationship you give and the gift of your relationship to us. We're thankful for that, Jesus. And we pray this in your name. And everybody said, amen.